Wishart. Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman. I always seem to follow the honourable gentleman when it comes to these debates in this House, and probably that's as it should be, given his very thoughtful contributions once again to the subject. And I want to pick up a couple of the issues that he highlighted in his very thoughtful speech. And can I thank the Leader of the House for her opening contribution, and also congratulate her once again for the very stout leadership she offered throughout the work of the working group. She mentioned 100 hours, and I'm looking at my colleagues behind me, and it has to say that perhaps wasn't the most peaceful 100 hours throughout some of these sessions, and there was a little bit of a fractious debate around some of the issues concerned, but I think this is a solid cross-party piece of work. And I have to concede that I don't think in my 17 years in this House that I've been involved in a piece of work which has been so considered, so reviewed and so comprehensively looked at and examined. And I think that goes as a tribute to all the members of the working group, many of whom are in the chamber here today, in the way that they diligently approached the work that was being done. And I can only say on my behalf, it was an absolute privilege to be part of this working group and hope to have played some little part in designing this hugely important report. I also want to, like the Leader of the House, pay thanks to the many witnesses that came in front of the working group and the staff who played a vital role in helping provide the testimony and evidence to the working group. In particular, I want to thank the Secretariat, some of whom were in the box this afternoon, for making sense of all of this fractious debate and all of the goings-on that was in the working groups, and actually produced what I think is a very readable report, and one that addresses nearly all the issues that was raised by the group. And there's also a new way of working, and probably the most innovative and useful feature is that we had members of the House's staff on the working group, which is probably a first, and there was equality of membership with staff of the House on this group. And I think what that does is give added legitimacy to this report, and hopefully go a long way to ensure that this report is taken up with a great deal of confidence from the staff that worked in the report. I would just hope that we could do more of this type of work in the future and involve the staff of the House and the staff of people who work for us in the critical work, particularly when it comes to House issues. We need to hear the voices of the staff because, as we found out in this working group report, they have solid contributions to make to the discussions that we have about how this House functions. But can I say, Mr Deputy Speaker, I actually believe that this is a significant and ambitious piece of work which will hopefully help to redefine the culture in our Westminster workplace. And for me, the most important part of this whole report is the first sentence of the first paragraph, which reads, "All those who work for or with Parliament have a right to dignity at work." Now, it's something that you would feel doesn't need to be said, but it underpins everything throughout this report. And I believe that this cannot be said enough and reiterated enough as we go forward in our work. If we look at the parliamentary state, 15,000 people work in and around the parliamentary state. Now, you've got us weird and demanding members of Parliament, you've got even stranger members of the House of Lords, and then we've got the staff that provide this support for us so that we can stand here and make these grandstanding speeches and try to impress our constituents. It's our staff that supply and provide this. So it's an estate full of very diverse and sometimes weird and strange people, I think we'd have to conclude and concede. But there is one thing in common that should unite everybody in this estate, and that is the conviction that everyone who works here has the right to expect to work in an environment free from bullying and harassment, especially sexual harassment. There should be zero tolerance for any inappropriate behaviour. And this report wasn't created in a vacuum, Mr Deputy Speaker. It was a response to some very serious allegations that emerged at the end of last year, when leaders of all our parties got together and decided that something had to be done in Parliament, and this had to be addressed. It was such a critical feature and issue that something had to be done in terms of, and that was them that sanctioned the work that we did. But it's also as part of the wider societal debate that's going on just now in response to the many revelations following the Weinstein revelations in Hollywood. And I believe, Mr Deputy Speaker, we're at a critical juncture in the debate about harassment in the workplace, and we therefore have a historic opportunity to redefine what is and what is not acceptable and make an important contribution and commitment to dignity in work. And in this it is absolutely essential that Parliament leads the way. This is the forum of our national debate. This is the centre of our democracy, and we would be shirking in our responsibility if we didn't put out the strongest possible statement that it is not acceptable in this place, as it should be unacceptable in any workplace across the United Kingdom. If we did not lead the way and put in place procedures and processes to deal with our own issues, we would in fact be letting down the people that we serve right across this country. We should set the example, and I believe that this document does that. It sets out very clearly our commitment to put our own house in order. Now, we sort of got a sense of how big the scale of this problem is in our particular workplace, because as part of our work in the working group, we commissioned a short survey asking people in Parliament about their experiences, and we got a very solid response from members of staff who worked right across the estate when asked about their experiences of bullying and harassment. Some 1,377 responses. And the results of this survey, combined with the surveys that were done by Unite and MAPSAS, gave us a pretty strong impression of some of the unsavoury activities that had been going on within the House of Commons. And some of the findings were actually quite shocking. What the surveys revealed is that bullying, harassment and sexual harassment have been a feature in the lives of so many people who work in Parliament. 39% of all the respondents had reported experience of non-sexual harassment or bullying in the last year. 19% of respondents reported experience of sexual harassment, including witnessing sexually inappropriate behaviour. Now, I will just received, I'm sure every other member has, just an email from the Young Women's Trust, a very important email, which unfortunately I saw too late to include in the formal part of my speech. But again, it emphasised very clearly that there are issues in workplaces right across this country. And the figures that they found in the workplaces that young women currently work in is very undifferent to what we found in the House of Commons. And I think that's also an example of why we should take this up. So what is proposed, we've heard from the other House and from the Honourable Gentleman, is a new shared code of behaviour which will underpin the new complaints and grievance policy. And what we'll have is a new, transparent, robust and credible complaints and grievance system that protects the confidentiality of proceedings and applies natural justice at its core. And it will be independent of the political parties, and that is a key feature, Mr Deputy Speaker. There have been concerns raised about the political parties' abilities to deal with these issues. And as we look around, and I'm not looking at any particular party, but I think all our parties are just bad at doing this stuff. What we have are several unresolved cases of people who have been charged with all sorts of activities who have still not had this heard properly. And I think there is a lack of confidence out there about political parties' abilities to take these issues up because of fear that somehow the political parties will try to defend and protect their own political interest. So an independent route, therefore, is absolutely essential that we do this. Now, a party route is still going to be available for people who feel that's more appropriate for them, but I hope in time that the independent route will be the one that will be routinely used, and we'll get a sense that if anybody raises any complaints or issues about activities in this House, it will be through the independent route that will actually be taken. Now, another feature I find particularly attractive and helpful is the proposal that all our staff secure HR support. I was actually quite shocked, and I've been in this place quite a long time, that there wasn't that facility available for members of staff. And it's absolutely essential, given that we're going to go forward with new codes of behaviour and also like new lookings at procedures about grievance resolving, that support is going to be given to our staff. So I think this is an important new innovation, which I'm certain will be warmly received by members of staff throughout this House. But it's the concerns about sexual harassment that led to this group being set up. And in our report, we importantly recognise that sexual harassment is qualitatively different from other forms of inappropriate behaviour and requires, therefore, different definitions, procedures and approaches. And this new confidential scheme will provide practical and emotional support to any complainant and respect absolutely that complainants have confidentiality and they have no obligation to report criminal offences to the police, though they will be supported if they feel that's appropriate in their choice to do so. All reports will be handled by a specialist trained independent sexual violence advisor who will be a single point of contact throughout the proceedings. And I think the way that this has been designed will give confidence to anybody who wants to bring forward these things, respecting confidentiality and the proper road mapping of how complaints are going to be conducted and progressed. And sanctions are important. We've already heard a few issues about sanctions. I was really disappointed when over Christmas a draft report was leaked to the press. And the way that the press sought to portray and present this was that it would be nothing other than an apology or a slap in the wrist that members would get if they were transgressors or found to be guilty in some sort of respect of any transgression that they'd been committed. But it was never anything of the sort. And we've put forward a whole range of sanctions which will be in place from resolution dispute resolving, where it might just be necessary for an apology to get something fixed. But it goes on and includes right up to the possibility of recall of an MP and the expulsion of a member of the House of Lords. And the full range of sanctions are included in the report. And lastly, Mr Speaker, I want to talk a little bit just about the culture of this House, because this has been an issue that came up again and again in our deliberations, and it's really important that we have a look at this. I hate the culture in this House. I've never, ever been fond of being in the House of Commons. I know some of my friends think it's a fantastic place to live and work and to do their business. I always find it a little bit uncomfortable. There's something, there's maybe the Scottish nationalist in me that perhaps grates just a little bit. But I think that this House has a peculiar historic culture that practically oozes patriarchy and an abuse of power. I had a female friend in the House just a few months ago who was very conscious of these issues, and she told me that the portraits in this place practically seem to harass you because of the way that the images are all set up, and the defining feature of this House are embedded in this historic patriarchy that we have in this place. Our workplace is a weird bastion of privilege where we call friends like mine who came in to visit the House strangers, and our legislation is practically designed on a sea of booze with the very many bars that we have within the perimeter of this particular chamber. Yes, of course I will.
He's making a very good point about the sea of alcohol in this place, and would you share my concerns that I was in an event that started at 1 o'clock this afternoon and wine was being served? Does he consider that appropriate within this building?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising this, because I want to come on to evidence which I found compelling that we secured during the course of our inquiry. And that was from Sarah Child, who authored the Good Parliament report, and I know that my honourable friend will be familiar with that report. A fantastic report that sort of got to the heart about how this place does business, the culture and the environment that we work in, and made some practical suggestions about how this be addressed. I mean, we work some nights till after midnight, you know. I don't mind doing that. It's what we do as parliamentarians, but don't try to suggest to me that is good working practice, that allows, you know, like people to get home to their families and have a proper work-life balance. It's nonsense. I mean, we do the work because we do it and we're committed to doing it, but I don't think there's anybody who would ever convince me that this would be good practice. And again, it gets back to this example of this place, that we should lead the way in good, normal working practice. Now, we do it in Scotland. We've designed our Parliament, which is around the normal working day. And if they could do it, so could we. And I hope that as we go forward, we'll continue to engage the work of Sarah Child, who I couldn't commend her report enough when it comes to having a look at the culture and environment of this place.
Does the member give way?
Yes, of course I will.
I thank the member for giving way, and he's making some very powerful points. But would the member agree with me that everyone in this chamber, we're here to do a very important job, a very responsible job. We're making the laws which dictate and set the parameters for people right across the United Kingdom. And is there not at the very heart of this, we can talk about the culture, we can talk about the environment, we can talk about the bars, but ultimately there's an important issue about personal responsibility. The individuals across all of the parties should know better should take personal responsibility and should act in an appropriate and respectful way to everybody, regardless of the working hours, regardless of the bars, regardless of the restaurants.
Equal to the Honourable Lady, and I almost take that as a personal chastisement, because I have to say that, and I'm sure honourable members will know this, I sometimes enjoy a pint of the guest ales in the Strangers Bar, and the Honourable Lady is absolutely right. It's all about personal behaviour. But we have an unusual workplace where this is allowed. I don't know any other workplace in my constituency which would have 6 bars as a feature of its normal day-to-day business. And I think we have to recognise that because of the way this is set up, not just with the bars or whatever, but the way the whole place is designed, it can lead to difficulties and issues. And we've begun to see them in the course of the past years. The member for Essex and Harwich and West Essex mentioned how historically we got to this place. Well, maybe it's to do with a little bit about how this house has been constructed and designed and the way that we do our business. So I think all of these things are perhaps worth looking at. And I'm glad I got onto the Honourable Gentleman, because he mentioned training in his contribution. And we spent hours and hours discussing the issue of training, and I think we got to a reasonable place where a consensual view started to emerge about how we should report this in the working group report. And I mean, I would have view that there should be compulsory training. And I actually supported the idea that there would be a kite mark given to members of Parliament who had been through training. So members of staff, if they were looking round, for example, about who they should work for, would see a kite mark attached to a member of Parliament, knowing that they had been through training, and they would have a better expectation of a good workplace environment then, as opposed to somebody who rejects training out of hand and who there might be issues with. And I thought that was a good suggestion. I couldn't convince them to the House on that one. And I know this was a proposal that actually came from some of the staff representatives on the group. So I think that, as a way forward, we have to do this. But training will be mandatory for new members of Parliament when they come in. And the Honourable Gentleman makes a good point. Most members of Parliament who come here have never been employers before. I was never an employer. I know that several people, particularly maybe this side of the House, maybe not so much on the denizens of business on that side, but those of us who come from a more modest background when it comes to these issues have perhaps never been employers before. I didn't know how to manage staff, and you had to learn through experience and doing it on the job. So I think there's something really helpful and useful about giving that training, not just about issues to do with equality, but issues to do with how to be a good employer. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. And I welcome the recommendation that in the next Parliament, members will be obliged to go through training. And sometimes, I mean, the people who will rush to go to training will be those of us who are interested in equality issues. I mean, I've got no issue about taking training, and I will look forward to it. But it's how we drag the old dinosaurs, those that have a more traditional view of the workplace environment that might go to influence some of their approaches to employing members of staff. It's how we get them down there. And maybe that kite mark issue might be the way that will define people who are prepared to have quality training and those who don't. And of course, I give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. I think he may, I hope to encourage him, because I know that we went through so many drafts of this report and the different issues, but the good employer standard idea is in paragraph 81 and also in paragraph 79. I was very happy that we did get to the place of saying, until such time as training is mandatory, records of those who have completed the recommended training will be publicly available, which I think certainly might help focus minds before compulsion is actually there.
And I know the points of the point. There's a kite mark related issue which was maybe just slightly different to what was eventually agreed, but I do accept that, of course, and I think it's a welcome addition to this report. Mr. Speaker, I think you can sense, I think this is a really, really important report, and I think it was certainly worth spending all those 100 hours in the course of those last few months. And I actually see this as being more than just a report for this House. I think this could be a blueprint for complex workplaces right across the country, and could possibly be the start of a permanent change to the culture of this place. There is no going back, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Yes, of course I'll give way. I was about to finish, but I'll get way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank him very much for giving way, and I'm fascinated by his remarks on training, and I agree with about 99% of what he's saying. I wonder if he could comment further for us on what his thoughts about when training has been taken, how often people should renew and undergo that training again, because we all know that workplaces change very fast and legislation changes fast, and what was considered acceptable maybe 10 or 15 years ago isn't anymore? I'd be interested in those comments.
And I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady because it's not something that we considered, and I think that she's right, that such as a fast-changing, evolving workplace environment, that there should be a requirement for people to come back and refresh, because we are seeing new innovations, and I don't think, I'm looking around at colleagues from the working group, and I can't see any real objection to that, and I think as we go forward, Leader of the House, that might be something that we might consider as we do evolve in this report. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Gentleman giving way. And surely, if we only have to look outside this space to realise that almost every other industry in the UK, there is something called continual professional development. And if the dinosaurs don't like being dragged into that, they know what the alternative is.
A useful contribution from the Honourable Gentleman. I mean, my workplace background was in a rock band, so I'm not all that familiar with some of the things that maybe been going on in industry before, though I'll obviously take lessons from the Honourable Gentleman who seems to know what he's talking about. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'll conclude by saying again that this is a helpful and worthwhile document, and I believe there's no going back now in the quest for equality. We reached a defining point last year when all these issues started to emerge in the range of societal campaigns online amongst people who just decided they'd had enough of all this thing. There's no going back, and I hope that this little report will maybe mark the beginning, the end of some of the horrible, appalling practices we've seen in this House over the years.
Carper.